Hello everyone, myself Dr. Priyanka Shankarishan, Assistant Professor, Department of Applied Biology, University of Science and Technology, Meghalaya. Today we are going to take up an important topic, that is biosafety risk assessment.
So now when we say risk assessment, it means a process of evaluation including the identification of the uncertainties of the likelihood and also the severity of an adverse effect or any adverse event which may occur to man or to the environment following an exposure. Okay, so this is the risk assessment. The risk assessment is the backbone of a biosafety practice. The risk assessment is the best method for determining the proper biosafety level and the safety practices which has to be followed in the work. Although there are many tools available to assist the assessment of a risk for a given experiment, but still the most important one is the professional judgment which comes from expertise and which comes along through more work. Now risk assessments should be performed by individuals which are most familiar with the specific characteristics of the organisms that are being considered and the equipments and the procedures which are being used for that experiment, the animal models that are being used, and the containment equipment and the facilities available to carry out that particular experiment. Fine. So risk assessment is mainly the process of evaluation of any likelihood or likelihood of the severity of an adverse effect which may arise due to certain exposure to certain risk sources. Fine, I think it is clear up till now. So next, there are different types by which the risks can be assessed. The different types of risk assessments include microbiological risk assessments in animal biosafety, risk assessments of genetically modified plants, and risk assessments of genetically modified organisms. So from this diagram, I have divided the whole thing into two parts. First is a risk assessment and second is the risk management. The identification of the biological hazard, classification of the organism, and the type of manipulation and the probability of exposure, that is the severity of exposure, and its containment falls under the heading risk assessment. Now when we talk about risk management, the risks which may be arising due to these processes has to be managed, has to be contained, and that implementation of the recommended containment level for the maximum protection of human health and the environment from the risks caused due to the exposure of certain risk organisms is known as risk management. Okay, so this diagram shows me the two different parts of risk management and risk assessment. Now I shall be coming up to the different types of risk management. First is the microbiological risk assessment. So the risk groups have been assigned by the biohazardous agents. We have already studied that in unit 1. They indicate how dangerous a particular organism can be and to determine the different risk groups that we are working on, the different criteria have been formulated. First is the pathogenicity and the virology, the route of infection, the agent which gains entry into the host, that is the route of infection, the mode of transmission, that is how the agent travels to the host and from the host to the other organisms, the survival in the environment, that is how stable the agent would be outside the host, the environmental conditions necessary for its survival, and for how long can it be survived. So these different factors can be is studied for the assessment or for the risk assessment of the microbiological agents. So these are some of the more important factors or criteria which is studied for the determination of risk assessment for microbiological agents. The infectious dose, the availability of effective preventive and the therapeutic treatments, the host range, what are the primary, intermediate, and the different hosts that are required for a particular organisms, the impact of introduction or the release into the environment or the public, that is if the agents were introduced into a general public, into a general population, what would be the economic, clinical, and the biosecurity impact. This is one of the very recent examples of the coronavirus or COVID-19, how the release has been caused a great impact on the total economic, clinical, and the biosecurity. Next is the aerosol generation, the concentration of the pathogen, etc. You can just have a reading of the different subheadings that I have mentioned in the slides for the better understanding. Now the risk assessments in animal biosafety. The risk assessments in case of models of animals should include the following. The species of the animal which is used for the study should be known to us and should be allowed to be used in the labs. The nature of the animals, that is their aggressiveness and tendency to bite and scratch, should be known. An appropriate medical surveillance program for the staff should be constituted. An operations manual must be prepared and adopted. The animal should not be admitted other than those used for the experimental purpose